Welcome back to our final session in our study on the book of Esther. This story has no shortage of ups and downs, tension and intrigue. I hope you've enjoyed our time together as much as I have. In fact, I wish that we could be on the same side of the screen right now, because I just feel like coming to the end of this epic story, it deserves to be celebrated. We should have some cupcakes or throw some streamers on the wall or something. So hopefully you at least have a snack close by as we open up to Esther chapter 8. Now, after so much turmoil and chaos and destruction, I'm kind of ready for a happy ending, aren't you? And I think we start to get that right here in verse 1. It says, "That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther told him that he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate." This is great. King Xerxes is doing everything he knows to do to make things right with his wife. So he gives Esther Haman's estate as her very own. He appoints Mordecai to Haman's old job as his right-hand man. All of this is wonderful. There's just one little problem. The Jews are still scheduled for annihilation. And so we see Esther approach the king and make a request, much like she has in the past. And this is her case, starting in verse 5. She says, "If it pleases the king, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" But there's nothing he could do about the edict. Once the law has been sealed with the king's signet ring, it cannot be overturned. We know this. We've already seen this in the book of Esther a couple of times. Remember chapter 1, Xerxes banished Queen Vashti, and he made it a law. And then in chapter 3, Haman crafted this edict to kill the Jews, and he sealed it with the ring. So there's really only one possible hope at this point. Xerxes gives his signet ring to Mordecai, and he instructs him to write a new decree as he saw fit. And so that's exactly what Mordecai does. In verse 9, it says, "At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of all 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies." All right, suddenly, our author is no longer interested in contrast, but comparison. Did you hear it? Just like Haman's edict, Mordecai's edict is written in every language. Just like in Haman's edict, Mordecai's edict goes out to all 127 provinces. Just like with Haman's edict, Mordecai's uses the language destroy, kill, and annihilate. And then in verse 12, just like with the first edict, the second one is to be carried out on the same day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. So just as a reminder, Haman's edict goes out in the first month, the month of Nisan. Now, Mordecai's edict is going out on the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. And all of this is to go into effect in the 12th month, the month of Adar. So there's a lot of room right here. There is a lot of time to make preparations. There's also a lot of time to worry and stew and wonder about the outcome of all of this. But you know what's interesting? It doesn't seem to be what's happening here. Look at verse 15. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa they held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. All of a sudden, we're right back where we started. I mean, you remember what happened in chapter 1. There was this great banquet held where there was much celebration and feasting. But what you may not have noticed was the party decor. Look back at chapter 1, verse 6. It says that the garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars, and that there were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. So what is our author trying to tell us here by pointing to all of these colors and fabrics and stones? I think the message is pretty clear. The Jews were not just delivered. They were empowered. So it's no surprise then when we get to chapter 9, we read on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. All of the edict went out by the king, and on this day all of the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But now the tables had turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. And if you keep reading, you'll soon see the Jews killed 800 men just in the city of Susa, and they killed 75,000 other enemies of the Jews in all of the provinces. And on top of that, the 10 sons of Haman were killed and impaled on poles, which just brings a whole new meaning to like father, like son. Now, some have taken ethical issue with this, and I understand. If it was wrong for the Persians to annihilate the Jews, then how is it okay for the Jews to turn around and administer the same sentence on the Persians? It's a fair question. So here are just a few factors that may relieve some of that discomfort for you. First of all, Mordecai's edict gives permission to the Jews to defend themselves against anyone who attacks them. He does not give explicit permission to attack anyone who is not first the aggressor. That's important. Here's the second thing. Logic tells us that King Xerxes is not going to give his permission to annihilate the entire nation of Persia. That just goes against his own interest. And I think we know King Xerxes well enough to know that he's going to protect his own interests, right? So this is probably why the decree limited the fighting to 1 day, and then it was only extended for an additional day. But there was an endpoint to this. The bloodshed had a cutoff point for both sides. So this was not an unlimited murderous mayhem situation. Here's a third factor to consider. Personally, this one brings me the most joy. Chapter 8, verse 17, we see that before the war even began, there were a number of people who became Jews because they were afraid of the Jews. So these are people that wouldn't have even been fighting. Now, typically, I wouldn't say that fear is a great method of proselytizing, but it's a starting place. And then here's the final factor to consider. And I think this one speaks to the motives of the Jews, and it proves them to be faithful to God's agenda and not their own. In chapter 8, we see that the Jews are given permission to take plunder from their enemies. But in chapter 9, in multiple places, it says they chose not to. Again, this is not about vengeance, but vindication. So the 1 to 2 day battle comes to an end, and then we see the Jews do something here that was very customary for them after experiencing a victory at the hand of God. They stopped, and they gave thanks. In fact, this became a national holiday, and they called it Purim. Because while Haman had cast the lot, which was called a pur, to seal their fate of destruction, God saw fit to save them by the hand of a Gentile king through the influence of their divinely placed queen. In fact, Mordecai and Esther make sure that this holiday will withstand the test of time. They wrote another letter to all of the provinces, and this one was much more cheerful than the other two. This is what it says, chapter 9, verse 28. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. And then finally, in chapter 10, we get our happy ending. It says King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not all written in the books of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Yes, they are. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people, and he spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. I told you, the finale of this story calls for a party. And I love that that's exactly what Mordecai and Esther did. A celebration of all that God has done to flip the script on Haman's plan of annihilation. And all throughout the Old Testament, we see this as a common reaction from the Israelite people. God provides and they party. Think about it. They celebrate the Feast of Weeks, which celebrates the first fruits of the harvest every year. They celebrate the Feast of Passover, which of course celebrates their salvation from Egypt. Also, the Feast of Unleavened Bread celebrates the first days of the Exodus. The Feast of Tabernacles commemorates their wandering in the desert. They're wandering in the desert. Imagine being at that party. Hey, remember manna? That was awesome. What? And now they celebrate Purim too. Once again, God has prevailed on behalf of his people. And have you ever noticed the typical requirements, what they were during feast time? There's really only two things. No work and lots of food. So I just have one question left. Why do we not do this more? Seriously, I'm going to be honest. I don't know if I stop and give thanks through prayer on a regular basis. Certainly not a party. But what would that look like? What would it look like if we, as Jesus followers, followed in the footsteps of the Jews who have gone before us and we just celebrated? What would it look like for us as individuals? What would it look like for us as a community if we celebrated the provision of a new job? If we celebrated being healed from sickness? If we celebrated a full table? If we celebrated, properly celebrated, baptism? I think if we became a people who celebrated God at work, we would be more aware of his presence. That's certainly not a bad thing. I think we would become a more grateful people, which of course means we would complain less. I think we would become a more generous people and a more joyful people, which means that we would be noticed by the world and our witness would now stretch even further. To become a people who celebrates, this is certainly a worthy goal. And guys, it's a goal that comes with cake. So what are we waiting for? Now, as we set our eyes on the joy that we find in Jesus and his mighty acts in us and for us, would you just allow me to read this benediction over you from 1 Peter? Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. Now in all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him. And you are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Amen. You know, my story is a lot like Esther's story. And I imagine that your story is a lot like Esther's story too. No, I'm not a queen. And no, I've never saved an entire people group from slaughter, although that would be really cool. I mean, my story is a lot like Esther's story because God has never written on my wall to give me explicit directions on what to do with my life. God has never spoken to me in the dark hours of the night to offer encouragement. To be perfectly honest, there's been a lot of seasons where, when I think back on it, I really thought God was all but silent. But when I look back on my story now, I see him everywhere. And his voice is profound. I know without a shadow of a doubt that God is in control and he is good. God is trustworthy and he hears me. God is just, and I know he rejoices over me. My God may be invisible, but he will forever be invincible. And may we never forget what a privilege it is to be written into the amazing story of God.